Okay.
Doctor visits, for example, they range between $30 and $50 generally to
Okay.
see a doctor, and the availability is great. You can generally, message the doctor and go and see him that day or the next day,
Oh,
which
wow.
is kind of unheard of
Yeah,
for
that
a lot of
is.
people, including even where I'm from. Dentist appointments for a cleaning, that's probably going to cost you about the same, around $40 for a cleaning.
All right, so today we are heading down to this beautiful country and this incredible city within this beautiful country with my friend Jason Scott. We are heading down to Cuenca, Ecuador. Jason, thanks for being a part of the podcast.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So let's start off first by you telling us a little bit about who you are, where you're originally from, and how you landed in Cuenca, Ecuador.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, that one. So I'm from Australia. You can probably tell from the accent. There's not many Australians in Cuenca. There's probably like two or three of us that I actively know of. I'm sure there's more, but in my sort of friend circle. But I'm an ex-digital nomad that basically grew roots in Ecuador. I was living in Medellin, Colombia at the time for sort of 6 months doing the digital nomad thing. And I wanted to come to Ecuador for a holiday, go kite surfing. And I actually had a lot of issues getting my kite surfing gear into the country with customs. Took a long, long time. It didn't actually end up happening. And then I started to know the country. I met my current fiance and yeah, just fell in love with the country and basically never left.
Wow. So you met your fiance in Ecuador.
We have a family here. So yeah, we met in Quito. She's Quiteña. And so we lived there for a little bit, but then we actually made the move. So like many of your viewers, I imagine, we actually did a little exploratory trip from Quito to Cuenca. We checked it out for a few weeks, just loved it. It just worked for us, especially with the family. It was just
Mhm.
a bit slower pace of life and just a much more accessible city for us. And so we made the move, and that was actually a big deal for my partner from Quito. All her family network was there, still is there. So it was a big deal it's the same country, but still, it's like an 8 hour drive or, a short flight away. So family
Mhm.
visiting, it still happens, but it's obviously not as frequent as it was previously. And family here in Ecuador is a big deal. So that was quite a big move for her, but she hasn't looked back either.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. For the viewers that have never been to Cuenca, give them an idea. Describe Cuenca, what it's like, what the city's like, what the vibe's like for them to get an understanding of what it's about.
Yeah, I think, I mean, myself included, a lot of visitors first time, we kind of get captured by the romanticism of El Centro. To me, my first experience was I kind of felt like I was walking down like 18th century Spain. And it's kind of like a city that stood still in many ways. Obviously, the whole world is changing, and I'm not saying Cuenca is an exception, but it does feel like the pace of change is a lot less.
Mhm.
So it's got this sort of slower vibe, slower pace of life, but that also presents a lot of challenges for expats, especially when you come from maybe a faster paced life and
Sure.
things work very differently here. So
Yeah.
adapting to the culture tends to be a challenge for a lot of people, myself included. I've been here for 7 years in Ecuador and I'm still learning things every day. And that's part of it that I personally really like, that adaptation and the change.
Yeah, yeah. There's certain countries that I kind of think of as type A countries. You know, type A, and Australia is definitely one of those. United States is definitely one of those. And so UK, and when you get down to these slower paced, different worlds and environments, it's an adjustment. It's
It
definitely an
is, and people have time to talk to you. Like you can walk down the street and you can have still like a random conversation with someone over something sort of small and trivial. Whereas if I was doing that in Australia, they would probably look at me like I'm a bit crazy.
So you said it, you described it as like Spain. Now I know it's a UNESCO World Heritage City,
Yeah.
and there's cafes, outdoor cafes. Are there museums there? Are there galleries? Do they have theater?
Absolutely. So from a cultural side of things, there is a lot going on in Cuenca. I like to say it's got a little bit of something for everyone. So from a cultural side of things, you do have the Cuenca Symphony, for example, is very popular here. It's free. I know a lot of expats go to that on a sort of weekly or once every 2 weeks sort of basis. there's always a lot of festivals going on here. So in terms of culture, for last week they had the Merca Art thing in Quinta Lucrecia, which is a large hacienda. But pretty much once a month, you can almost guarantee there's going to be some sort of festival going on. And
Mm.
especially around certain times of year, for example, Christmas and Easter, they take that really seriously. The street parades everywhere. So it's got a lot of that going for it. And in terms of the, let's say, it's a creator culture too. So what I mean by that is people will still spend time making things here, making art, making craft, and selling it or repairing stuff as opposed to throwing it out.
Hmm.
And again, that's something coming from a very consumer-based society that I love. Like the other day, I just went down the street and I got some shirts mended, some holes mended, and I got like five shirts mended for something like $10. I would never even think of doing that in Australia or pretty much any other country that I've lived in.
Hmm. So here, so here's my question for you. As a kite surfer, how did you select Cuenca, which is quite a distance away from the beach?
No. Yeah, no. There's no kite surfing in Cuenca. I don't want to build false hope. You could probably really make it happen on some of the lakes, and I have seen some people, but you have to be pretty die hard, and it's cold too on the lake. So
Yeah.
no, definitely not for me. It's definitely a beach thing. So the target for that was Santa Marinita. That's near Manta, sort of 30
Yep.
minutes south. That's kind of like the capital of kite surfing here, and you can actually go kite surfing with humpback whales because the seasons do overlap quite well. So that part of it is magical. But no, that's a holiday for me now. So once a year, we'll generally go to the beach and spend a month there or so, and I'll get my kite surfing fix in there. But the sports in Cuenca, it's more around horseback riding, mountain bike riding. So Cuenca literally means basin if you translate it. And so it is in a little basin, but you go outside the basin on the weekends. That's where a lot of the locals, for example, will have holiday houses and
Hmm.
whatnot. And so the outdoor hiking and those nature-based activities are probably the highlight in terms of what most of the people here would do in terms of sport. But then, of course, you've got equivolley, which is a bit of a hybrid of volley. It's a type of volleyball, basically, slightly different rules. But you go to any little town, and you'll see on Sunday they'll be playing some sort of equivolley competition.
Hmm. Do they play soccer there? Do they have a soccer stadium or? Curious about which countries are the best fit for you to move abroad? We just launched the Ideal Destination Finder, a fun 20-question quiz designed to help you discover the top 3 places in the world that match your lifestyle, preferences, and priorities. If you're feeling unsure about where to go, this is truly a remarkable tool that can help you gain clarity and direction on where to move abroad. Normally it's just $47, but for this month only, you can get it at a discount using the code ADV10 at checkout. To get started, go to adventurefreaks.com, scroll down a bit, and you'll see the Ideal Destination Finder here. All you have to do is click it and start the quiz. It's as easy as that. We'll also include the link in the description below, or you can scan the QR code on the screen above. Now let's get back to the video.
Yeah, they do have a soccer stadium, and actually Sting, we caught him playing 2 months ago at the soccer stadium,
Oh,
and
wow.
that was a lot of fun. The Cuenca team, unfortunately for soccer, isn't the best, but there is a strong national league here, and the Ecuadorian team is actually pretty good. I think we're ranked 2 or 3 at the moment in the South American qualifiers for the World Cup. So hopefully we make the next World Cup too, and I was here for the last one when they played, and that was a lot of fun. Everyone gets involved in that.
Yeah. Yeah, for the viewers, just to go back to the beach. So Manta is an area right on the beach in Ecuador that many expats actually move to. How long does it take you to get there from Cuenca, and how do you get there?
You can drive along the coast. Most expats, though, don't have a car, so they wouldn't necessarily be driving. But you can hire a private driver or you can get buses. I personally would choose to fly if that was my situation. I would fly from Cuenca to Manta. I'm not sure if there's a direct flight. You might have to go via Quito, but that's what I would do. And then just take a bus or something 30 minutes south to get to Santa Marinita if you wanted to go kite surfing or just hang out in Manta.
Okay, how much does a flight cost to get there?
Uh, if you look early enough, something like maybe $60, $70. I know
Okay.
we're getting flights to Quito a lot from Cuenca to Quito, and sometimes we're getting those for sort of less than $50 each
Okay.
way. If you get book really early enough, we've got some really good deals, but you do need to be onto it with the airline.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, thanks for that, Jason. That's fantastic. All right, well, let's dive into visa requirements. Every expat, retirees, I get a lot of retirees that watch these videos are interested in the visa requirements and if there is an income requirement. What can you share about that?
Yeah, there's a couple of different streams for visas. So there's probably like four or five main visas. Obviously, the retirement visa, if you qualify for that, that's probably the easiest path to go down, just in terms of paperwork. And it's a very clear path. So the income requirements for that. So in Ecuador, everything is pegged to the basic salary. So the basic salary in Ecuador right now is $470. And that tends to shift a little bit every year, sort of going up $10, $20, something like that. And so at the moment, it's three times the basic salary.
Mm-hmm.
So the income requirement for retirement visa is three times 470, which is $1,410 per month. So your social security would effectively need to be that or more to be eligible for that visa. Other visas that are very popular, the investor visa, I think that's pegged to the basic salary too, but I think that's about 100 times the basic salary. So you have to make an investment of $47,000, I believe, at the moment. And the main path for that is either property, which, I mean, I haven't actually said this yet, but we run a full service real estate agency in Cuenca. That's where we make our income from.
Okay.
And so that's a popular option, or CDs is the other popular option. So a certificate of deposit, and both have their own risk profile. A lot of expats like the CDs because the interest rate here, it actually is really quite reasonable for CDs. You're looking at 8% plus. I know quite a few expats, for example, that will just live off the interest rate from their CD. That obviously has its risks as some locals, for example, or a lot of locals, they went through a crash in 2000 where they moved from the sucre to the US dollar, and that destroyed a lot of people's retirements, everything. And so there is this sort of distrust of the banking system here because of that. And so a lot of locals will try and not put all their eggs in the one basket. I think diversifying is probably the safest strategy anyway.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Great information. So
But just back on the income requirements. So
yeah.
if you don't meet those income requirements, the best path to potentially look at, my suggestion would be the professional visa, because that only has the income requirement of one basic salary. So the main requirement there would be a degree. So any sort of degree generally, and there's a few outdated topics or videos and information out there on this in terms of does it have to be a school registered by a Senasict, which is the education authority here. So those rules have changed a little bit in the last few years. So if you're interested in that path, you definitely want to do a little bit of research for content that's come out within the last year. But that can be a very good path. And even though it's called a professional degree, that doesn't necessarily mean you don't have to work here with that degree. You just have to have the education requirement fulfilled.
Wow.
And,
So
and
there's
it's one basic salary. So $470 versus $1,410.
wow. So they want to see that you have at least 470 of an income coming in,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
you need to have a bachelor's degree.
It doesn't have to be a bachelor's degree necessarily. The main thing that they look for is where they can be quite tight is the mode of study. So there's certain degrees, for example, if you've just studied them online, they probably or they may not accept it. But that's where it gets into a little bit of a gray area, and that's where I'd probably suggest reaching out to someone that does this sort of day in day out for your specific degree. Is it going to be accepted?
Hmm. Okay. And you mentioned that you do real estate and support people purchasing real estate. Do you do rentals there too?
Yeah, we do rentals as well. We do both.
Okay.
Some agents only do one or the other, but we like to focus on both because I've moved countries like seven times in my life, and ultimately it's the help that you get when you land that can really make or break your experience in that country. And so I try and help both renters and the buyers. They're both very different markets, but the market in Ecuador in general, when it comes to real estate, it is significantly different to what we tend to be used to. We come from sort of
Hmm.
organized markets.
Hmm.
Maybe if you come from the US, you have the luxury of something like an MLS that everyone has access to.
Yeah.
Nothing like that exists here in Cuenca. So it's definitely, I call it the Wild West still of real estate.
Yeah.
Agents don't necessarily share leads. Agents don't necessarily play nice to each other or to
Sure.
clients sometimes. So it's a tough market for expats to come in
Yeah.
and just to understand it. Understanding the pricing, like pricing transparency is not great. There is
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
real comps here, and a lot of people will go onto Facebook Marketplace, Google Cuenca and real estate, and figure, oh, I can get a rental for $300 a month. Like, yeah, that's possible, but that's probably not necessarily going to be in one of the areas that actually you want to live in.
Sure.
Same with buying, that there can be a big expectation gap just from seeing a few things online to where they actually want to live when it comes to Cuenca.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, that's great information. My next question is people are concerned about safety. Is
Yeah,
Cuenca safe?
Cuenca is safe. So we were talking about the coast before, and look, I don't want to put on blast people that are living on the coast, but it's a very different, for me, it's a very different risk profile. So the main issue here is narco-based violence. And yes, a lot of it is, narco on narco. And there is a lot of people that will say, just keep your head down and you're not going to be impacted by it. But, the amount of violence that is occurring on a daily basis on many of the coastal areas, especially the ports. So they're all vying for control of the port. But
Mhm.
that's the aim of the game, right? So the big ports are in Guayaquil, and the other big port is Manta.
Mhm.
And so both of those territories are very hotly contested by numerous different narco groups.
Mhm.
And it's not just narco on narco. So there are extortion, which happens a lot. So even small businesses do get affected by it. Small fishermen, are having to pay these narcos, and that just has a really big trickle down effect. So, for
Mhm.
example, some of the small businesses on the coast they can't afford to pay the narcos, or the risk is too much, and so the small businesses will close, which has this flow-on effect. The bigger businesses also sort of tend to struggle. Us in Cuenca, so just coming back to sort of the real estate market, we do one of our biggest markets is actually people moving from the coastal areas, both expats and locals, and even Quito to some degree as well. The security situation in Quito has decreased a little bit in recent years too. So that's probably our strongest market right now, and that actually keeps the Cuenca market very, very competitive and
Okay.
quite buoyant. Is people moving to Cuenca for the safety elements itself?
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of insulated there in this beautiful little part of the country. Um, Before we dive into the cost of living, just breaking down some of the costs, what's the weather there year round like? Because I think a lot of
I mean,
retirees would love it.
they do love it. I mean, they call it sort of spring-like weather all year round. Um, it's actually a tough question for me because I've been here so long that for me, I look outside and I know it's going to be sunny. So it's on the equator, so 12 hours of sun, day in, day out. The biggest issue can be kind of repetitive and too much of the same. So like if you like your seasons and you like different clothes and whatnot, you're probably not going to find that here. But I can go out, for example, in this. I wear this a lot, sort of day in, day out, short sleeve. Sometimes I'll chuck on a jacket, and that's enough for me. So we do have sort of rainy seasons and not rainy seasons. So I would say that's probably the biggest factor when it comes to weather
Hmm.
is the how much it rains in any one particular time and the other effects of that. So for example, last year we did have an electricity issue in Ecuador. Maybe your viewers that are doing the research are already aware of this, but we had a pretty significant drought. Climate change and all the rest of it is getting more unpredictable every year. And so we did have droughts, and that means a lot of the electricity in Ecuador is hydro powered. And so that had the flow on effect that we did have electricity cuts here. And so the purchases of things like generators and like UPS backup systems,
Hmm.
it really sort of went through the roof, and we went through this cycle. That's changed. We've had a ton of rain recently. You could argue almost too much rain because that does induce some landslides in certain areas as well.
Hmm.
So the weather does play an important part, but the actual, the climate overall, for most people, it does fit this really nice sweet spot where they can be outside all day. The sun can be a different thing. So definitely, you want to put the UV protection
Yeah.
on because we are a lot closer to the sun here. You can get burnt easily.
Yes.
And the other thing that can catch a lot of people by surprise is just the altitude. So we are at a higher elevation here, and some people simply can't acclimatize to the higher elevation. And that's
Hmm.
something for me personally. I talk to a lot of people, when they're moving to Cuenca, and I can't really give good advice on that.
Sure.
It's really hard to know how your body is going to react at a certain altitude. So
Hmm.
the best advice is you come here, you take it slow for the first couple of days, drink a bunch of water, and just take your time to acclimatize because it can be very exciting when you come to a new place. You want to do everything and you want to do it all at once,
Yeah.
but no, like slow down, give yourself a break, try and avoid caffeine and alcohol and stuff like that to give yourself the best chance.
Yeah, I've heard that in Cuenca it's like 70 degrees almost every day of the year, and at night it drops down into the 50s.
Yeah, you do have that window, so it's very predictable. But the other thing that I love about Cuenca is I call it kind of choose your own adventure a little
Uh-huh.
bit. So on one side of Cuenca we have the Cajas, and that's a large mountain, and it's cold, and so you can get the wind coming from that. But the other side, actually where I am right now, where we're currently living, is a suburb called Chajruabamba. And this suburb is a 15-minute drive, but it is a lot warmer. It's where a lot of the nurseries are because of the climate and the growth potential here. And
Hmm.
there's basically so I talk in Celsius. So there's like a 2 degrees Celsius difference
Hmm.
between one side and the other. So again, it tends to be good weather profile for a lot of people, but you can also tweak that a little bit depending on your preferences too.
Do you find that most people that do move and live in Cuenca don't use air conditioning or heating?
We don't have air conditioning. You just generally won't find it. You might find the reverse cycle mainly for the heating benefit, but even that, a lot of people don't. Like for our family, we don't have heating elements. A lot of houses don't have inbuilt heating, and that's when it comes to property, we don't have those sorts of snow loads. So the construction is different here too. So we don't have snow loads. We don't have the high humidity. And
Yeah.
so that means, we just don't have to counter for those sorts of things when it comes to building houses. And
Yeah.
what I will say is the insulation side of things, it's mostly single pane. So there's no double insulation in a lot of areas. Why? Because most people don't see it as a necessary expense. The main reason that I would suggest you would want to potentially look at the double insulation is noise. That tends to be the number one sort of driver or concern for a lot of expats when they're moving here because look, Ecuador is noisy. There's no way around that. It is,
Mhm.
and that can be just hard to adjust to. We're talking about car noises, yes, but people partying on the weekends, people doing dancing in the morning at a local park with the
It's
the
like
high speakers,
that's
high
perfect for
energy.
you, Jason. You're a kite surfer. We know how you guys party.
Look, I'm fine with it mostly, but I have a higher tolerance. But especially when it comes to rentals, like a lot of people, that's the main requirement is they want to be somewhere that doesn't have any noise.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like it's a
Sure.
really really hard requirement to fulfill because we always tell people that we can help you with all of the known noise issues. So like the tranvia, we do have a tranvia in Cuenca, and yeah, it does make a little bit of a noise. It's on the track.
Yeah.
We know that. We can tell people that. What we can't necessarily tell people is that, okay, 3 doors down, you're going to have a really noisy family that's going to have a family gathering every week on Saturday
Yeah.
night. We don't know that. And
You're
so there's
right.
always going to be this potential element of surprise, which can always just knock you around a little bit.
Yeah, that's great information. All right, well let's dive into your world. Let's look, everybody wants to that's looking to move to Cuenca, they're going to need a place to live. What do rentals go for in Cuenca, in an area where you could pretty much walk everywhere, and then give us an idea if you live a little outside the city center, how much they drop down to.
Yeah, it's a good question. So most of our clients, they really want to stick to around 7 core neighborhoods. And so for that reason, those are the main neighborhoods that we service. And
Okay.
they tend to be those areas that you're talking about. Walkability is very high. One of the main features of Cuenca is the rivers. So we have two main rivers that run through the town, and a lot of people want to be close to those rivers because they're just nice and they take a lot of care on the rivers. The maintenance and whatnot is really, really well taken care of. So they're just really nice places to be, and they're just sort of focal points. So those are the areas that we tend to focus on, and rentals in those areas for like a 2 bedroom, they would generally start at around $600 a month. For a 1 bedroom, you can get away with something like $400 a month.
Okay.
But if you're moving outside of those areas and value is something that is very important to you, yeah, you can definitely go down another $100 or so a month for one bedroom or a two bedroom as well. These are condos mainly that I'm talking about.
Yeah, so you can find condos a little bit, you saying outside for 300?
Yeah, you could definitely find condos for 300 outside. Depends on the neighborhoods that you want to live in. So I'm talking mainly about the river access, and that's where people want to be. Like being completely transparent, a lot of our clients don't want to be in the neighborhoods that are renting for $300. The access to transport isn't the same.
Okay.
The walkability, it can be more like a concrete jungle sort of feel. And so it's really what your preferences are. But I find that definitely to be more of an outlier client that will come to us that wants to live in those areas.
For those
Yeah.
people that are really psyched about Cuenca, they get excited about it. I love this city. I mean, when you look at the pictures and the perfect weather and you're surrounded by beauty, you don't need heat, you don't need air conditioning. That just helps with the affordability of the place because those are can be costly when you live in the southern parts of Spain or Italy. For those people that are interested in moving there, you definitely want to go down and feel it out and explore it. How do people do that, Jason?
I definitely normally recommend an exploratory trip.
Okay.
So coming here, spending as much time as possible, and ideally, if you're thinking about making it your permanent place, so there's different types of people, right? So we deal with a lot of what we call snowbirds as well, people from the cooler areas, maybe someone from Canada, and they just want to escape the winter, and so they're looking for somewhere that they can come to 6 months on, 6 months off,
Mhm.
that sort of thing. That's a little bit different because those types of people generally aren't making a huge life decision. They're not selling their homes and packing up all their belongings, paying a lot of money to ship their belongings down to Cuenca, only to find out that what, Cuenca really wasn't for them. And so I always suggest come here, spending a bunch of time here. So with the visas for a tourist visa, you do get your first 3 months really easily for
Mhm.
most countries.
Mhm.
No paperwork required for that. You can just at the airport, they just ask you a couple of questions and away you go. And then you can extend that for another 3 months once you're here. So you can effectively spend 6 months with really little effort in
Mhm.
Ecuador before you even need to get to the visas that we were talking about before. And my suggestion is definitely to try and make use of those 3 to 6 months, if you can allow it. I know everyone is a little bit different in their circumstances, but if you're a retiree, for example, then generally you don't have a lot of things that are necessarily going to be holding you back from doing so. And
Yeah,
I always try and advise people to try and spend as much time here that you get over the sort of rose-colored glasses effect. Because
sure.
look, Cuenca is beautiful. It is charming. It does
It
have
is.
this feel that is just lovely, but that can also kind of almost distort your perception of what it's actually going to live like on a daily basis. And so I
Mhm.
think the best example I can give of that is we often find that expats love staying in El Centro, the historical center, which is the UNESCO World Heritage, and it has all the old stuff, and it is beautiful. It is lovely, and I love going there. But from a practical day-to-day living side of things, it is not ideal for a lot of expats. The apartments tend to be smaller. We have a lot of noise issues. Maybe the traffic can be a little bit on the too much side, maybe too much going on. And so we find that after sort of 6 months in El Centro, a lot of our clients actually want to move to a slightly different neighborhood that might be, maybe it's a little bit green down along the rivers. Maybe it's just a little bit quieter. Maybe it has a little bit more sort of upmarket amenities, the
Mhm.
cafes and that sort of thing in their exact neighborhood that they want to frequent to. So that's generally my advice is to come here, at least spend a couple of weeks,
Okay.
at least alone for the altitude, because you are not going to know if, especially if you're a little bit older,
Sure.
it can it can play havoc on your body, and you definitely don't want to sell your house in the States or whatever, and then find out you have these altitude issues once you've already made this big commitment.
Yeah, and you offer these types of tours?
We do, so we call them real estate trips. So the whole point of these trips is to come, especially for the guys that are making the big commitments. So if they're looking at buying something here, the tough bit is it's really hard. Again, what I said before, there's no comp. It's really tough to get a really good feel of what does a two-bedroom condo cost in certain neighborhoods in Cuenca.
Hmm.
And so we offer that service. So it is a paid trip, but we will go to basically the seven or nine neighborhoods that we tend to focus on and visiting real listings in those different neighborhoods. And so the whole idea is that they can walk away with the education to know, hey, is the Cuenca market something that appeals to me or
Hmm.
is it not? And if it's not, maybe you do just want to rent and take it easy or something like that. So
Hmm.
they are popular and we do I haven't had anyone say that it wasn't worth the money.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to sell
Sure.
it too
Sure.
much. I
Yeah.
do think there's a lot of value there just from an educational angle, and that's mainly why we do it. But the other reason I like to do it is I like to get to know our clients. And so we do have a YouTube channel as well, which we put a lot of effort into around education, especially when it comes to the property side of things, because there are a lot of potential pitfalls to look out for, and we try and pride ourselves on avoiding a lot of those.
Okay, yeah, and we're going to include all the links in the description as well, so that people can find you and reach out if they want to book something like that. That's the thing that I tell everybody too. Personally, for me, I wouldn't go and move anywhere unless I spend 2 to 3 months there just to really get a good feel of that environment and if it's right for me.
The thing with Cuenca is that, sorry, right, there's a lot of expats here too. So it can be a very soft landing spot for
Yes.
expats to meet other expats and whatnot. But I always suggest trying to get outside of that bubble a little bit,
Hmm.
because there's like 10 to 15,000 expats in Cuenca. But that's really like a drop of the ocean when there's like maybe 500,000 or give or take. So we're a very small percentage, and so if you're limiting your interactions to just expats, then you're going to miss a lot of
Hmm.
the flavor, if
Sure.
I'm being honest, of
Yes.
the city itself.
Yeah.
But the biggest issue is obviously the language.
Yeah.
Learning the language is a significant barrier to a lot of people. It's not insurmountable for most people as long as you're practicing dedicated, on some sort of routine basis. You can definitely get there,
Yeah.
and just don't beat yourself up too much if it takes a little bit longer than you
Sure.
would like.
Sure. What's the population of Cuenca?
I'd have to check. We did a census recently. I think it's around 500,000, give or
Okay.
take, depending on how far out of the city you go. Like,
Okay, gotcha.
what other provinces or whatnot you kind of include as well. So
Yeah.
Azaway is the name of the province here, and so I think the province is probably around 650,000.
Okay.
But obviously a large proportion of that is based in Cuenca itself.
Okay. All right. And then real estate for these tours that you go on, what are the going rates for, let's say, a one bedroom condo, furnished, move-in ready? What are they? What's an average on what you're seeing out there if people that are
Yeah, one
interested in
one bedrooms you
purchasing?
can definitely find under $100,000.
Okay.
But again, it depends on which area of town you want to be. So a two bedroom. So for example, we just closed on a two-bedroom condo in a nice area. It's a two-bedroom on a smaller side of a two-bedroom, and that went for around $120,000. Was furnished. But if you have a budget of, let's say, $150,000 for a two-bedroom condo, you are generally going to have a lot more options in terms of whereabouts in the city that you want to be. And
Yeah.
if you're looking towards El Centro, for example, that tends to be the most expensive real estate in town. And so that's definitely going to push the price up as well. And the other thing with El Centro, because it is you do have the UNESCO status. The rules around building in El Centro are very different too. And so I do get some people saying, hey, I want something cheap in El Centro, a fixer upper, that sort of thing. And my general response to that is, okay, let's just slow down a little bit, because you might actually be taking on a lot more than you can chew in many different ways from a time and also budget point of view.
Sure.
But that can sort of trip a few people up too, because you get caught up with the romance again.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, let's now dive in. Thanks for that, Jason. Let's dive into some of the costs here now. So let's just break down
Sure.
what you would think people would pay per month for utilities there.
Yeah, for utilities, I generally say budget around $50 or $60 for utilities. So, internet somewhere between 20 and $30. But on the internet, something that surprises a lot of people from North America is that the upload and download speeds are pretty much the same.
Okay.
So I know you as a YouTuber, you're probably uploading stuff a lot of the time, and you're probably finding, hey, my upload speed kind of struggles a little bit. In Cuenca, we don't have those same sort of bottlenecks, which can be really
Okay.
helpful.
Nice.
Other utilities, so gas is gas is cheap. So you're talking before about heating. Yeah, a lot of expats don't use the heating, but some do. And if it's gas heating, that is incredibly cheap. It's subsidized by the government, so you get the big, really big propane bottles for like $3 delivered, or maybe it's $3.25 more. I can't remember, but around that.
Mhm.
And that's going to last one person. That should last you a month. Even if you're using the heating elements as well.
Okay.
So that's super cheap. Water is very affordable, and electricity is also affordable. So there's nothing here that is you're going to find a lot of surprises. On the coast is different. On the coast, when you're using the AC, yeah, your bill is definitely going to be sort of around $100 just for the electricity alone.
Okay. And how much is cell phone coverage there?
Yeah, it depends what you want to get. So I use a very basic plan, if being honest with you. My plan costs $7 or it's not a plan, sorry. I don't advise, this is actually important. I don't advise going onto a contract. Why? Because they can be incredibly difficult to get out. My fiance has been trying to get out of a contract for years now, and they're just yeah, they you know how it is. They take you in loops and they make it
Yeah.
really difficult here in particular that one company is making it extremely difficult. So pay as you go is, I think, the way to go. I spend $7 a month, and that gives me, I'd have to check, I think like 3 gigabytes or something like that.
Okay.
But importantly, it includes unlimited WhatsApp. And so WhatsApp here is what everybody uses
Or yeah.
for everything.
Sure.
Most businesses, for example, they don't have websites. They will use WhatsApp and Facebook as their main means of communicating with their
Yeah.
target audience.
Yeah.
And if WhatsApp is included, then you really don't need a lot of a big data plan unless you're doing something very particular, which we don't. So $7 a month for my wife, or sorry, for my cell phone is it keeps me happy. You can get virtual SIM plans as well. So I like to have two different SIM numbers. Maybe, for example, you want to keep your SIM card in the US if or wherever you come from, then that can make sense to keep that SIM card and go onto a virtual SIM card. But then again, you'll be going onto that plan, which can be a little bit tricky to get out of.
Hmm.
And Skype is a big thing now, so I'm sure Skype doesn't exist anymore. So
Right.
that's really sort of rattled a lot of the community in terms of how do I communicate to people in the US now. So people are sort of scrambling for their alternatives. But WhatsApp tends to be a really good one. If you've got
Yeah.
family wherever you're from, jump on a WhatsApp plan and you've got your video calls already included.
Yeah, well, even Google Meets is free, and then you got Facebook. There's so many options out there so I get overwhelmed with all the different ways people are always trying to reach me, and I'm like going, I don't know how you tried to reach me because there's five different ways people are always sending me messages. You know,
I agree. There's too many channels now. It's
it's
confusing.
like, all right, well, let's look at how much would somebody spend for groceries per month?
This is probably one of the easiest ways to decrease the cost of living in Cuenca. And it's an easy way to do it is you stop shopping at the big supermarkets. So, for example, in Cuenca, the main one that most of the expats would shop at is Super Maxi, or we have a Mega Maxi here, which is the same sort of thing but bigger. If you can shift, especially your fruits and vegetables, from that to the local market, you're going to cut down your costs at least by half.
Hmm.
And it's just a much more rewarding local experience too. So I'm a big advocate of that. Every week we go to an organic market, and our family on fruits. We have a family of four. So we'll spend between $30 or $40 a week on fruits and vegetables. But this is abundant. This is everything that we could potentially ever want when it comes to fruits and vegetables
Hmm.
for the whole week. When it comes to the other side of things, we do have to go to Super Maxi, and that's where we buy some of our meat and whatnot. But for an average family, I would suggest something for a month. You're probably spending around $200 at Super Maxi, if that's where you're predominantly going to be shopping in the supermarket. But one good comparison right now, which I'm sure that some of your viewers are probably super keen and aware on, is the price of eggs. That hasn't exploded here like it has up there. So, we're still getting 36 eggs for like $3.50.
Okay,
So,
yeah,
you can't
nice.
you can't argue with that.
No. That's a good deal. So you're saying 200 for a family of how many?
No, I'd say 200 for like the average person.
Average person.
Our
Okay.
family would definitely spend more at the we're probably around $400 or $500 a month at
Okay.
Super Maxi. Yeah, we eat a lot.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. Transportation. How do people get around down there?
Most expats will stick to public transport, and especially in the areas that I'm talking about that they tend to target, the 7 or 9 neighborhoods, then there is no need to have a car.
Okay.
Cars will absolutely push your expense up significantly. And so I only say that to people that really value their freedom. So on the weekends, for example, our family, we love exploring. We love going outside the city and going to different farms and whatnot. But that is a significant strain on the finances.
Hmm.
So for the average expat that doesn't have a car, we have the Tranvia. So the Tranvia, if you don't have a card to access it, costs $1 per ride. If you do have a card, it costs 30 cents. I think if you're over 65, that cost goes down by half again. So, you're talking about next to nothing for the Tranvia side of things. There is a strong bus network that is operates in Cuenca as well. Expats definitely prefer the Tranvia over the buses as a general rule because it's just easier to manage and it kind of, it's just simpler to figure out.
Hmm.
But the taxis are a very significant advantage here. So anywhere in Cuenca, you can generally get to a place to another place in 15 minutes. That's the sort of rule that I use for most of my meetings and whatnot too.
Okay.
So that cost on a taxi around $2.
Wow. Okay. Um,
And we have meters here too. So some cities in Ecuador, especially for example Guayaquil, they
yeah,
don't have meters there, and you always need to negotiate ahead of time, and that can be
sure.
stressful because you don't know you're never going to get a good deal. Let's be honest when you're negotiating, and the meter tends to just take all that guesswork out. There is a slightly different rate for nighttime versus daytime, but again, we're really not talking much.
Yeah. Does the Tranvia, do they offer monthly passes?
No, that's a good question. I don't think so.
Okay.
But you generally just have a card and you'd go top it up. And that's
Gotcha.
what most people would do. And, if you're over 65, 15 cents a pop, chuck $10 on it and sort of forget about it for the next few months.
Okay. All right. The next thing is eating out in Cuenca. So what does a typical meal cost and what do you think somebody would need to budget per month to eat out there?
So this can range quite a bit. So you still do find, especially in El Centro, or even outside of El Centro. So what is very popular here is the set menu. So you'll still find a lot of the working people, they will go for an almuerzo, which is a set meal. You'll have a soup and a main and maybe a little dessert at the end with some sort of juice or some drink involved. And you can get those still for the $3. I'm not going to say that every one of those is amazing in terms of nutritional value, but some are good, but you do need to sort of work your way around it to find the good ones.
Hmm.
But that's just for the set lunch. If you're going out for dinner or something like that, then you can definitely find good meals for, around the $10 mark, maybe a little bit less.
Okay.
But if you go into the more high-end restaurants, yeah, you can absolutely spend $30 or $40 on a meal if you want. The
Okay.
food scene here has changed a lot in the past 10 years, even the last sort of 7 years that I've been here, there is a lot of variety. It does cater to visitors as well, which is something that didn't always happen. The big thing in Cuenca is pork. That's what
Hmm.
the city is sort of known for. I don't eat pork, so I can't really tell you too much about that. But even for someone like me, I eat a lot of fish, I eat a lot of chicken. I am never wanting for options. I like going to the cafes. I love coffee.
Hmm.
There's probably like 3 or 4 really good cafes here. My only thing I will say about them is that they tend to open on the later side, like 10 a.m. Some of the
Okay.
cafes will open, which seems crazy for me. I'm sort of on my third coffee by then.
Sure, sure. Do they have bakeries there too, where they make pastries and
Oh yeah,
bread?
they love the bakeries here. So very very popular. Every neighborhood, and this is one thing that I do want to touch on a little bit is the walkability factor. And again, the neighborhoods that we focus on, generally within a 1 block radius, that's where you can do a lot of your shopping. And you can do like your fruits and vegetables you're going to find a panaderia, a bakery, and probably like even a dentist or something like that in your neighborhood as well. So it's a very different feel. So you don't have to get in your car, go to a suburb to do your shopping, come back, and that's where you're living. So it's not broken up like that. So like in terms of the whole planning side of things, so we will, for example, rent a place to a family, but then after that family comes in, maybe that's rented to a shop, or a commercial premises, or someone that has an office.
Hmm.
So that the planning is very much a mixed environment, and I personally love that because it means that you can actually live in that same neighborhood as opposed to having to go outside of it all the time.
All right. Do you live in an area where you can walk pretty much everywhere yourself?
I'm an outlier, so I live in Chasurubamba. Chasurubamba is an interesting suburb because it's a little bit warmer and it's known for its green areas. And so we're raising family, and so we do love it out here. I would actually say Chasurubamba itself is not the most walkable area because it's one of those areas there's a lot of large haciendas here. And so it was big parcels of land that was effectively owned by certain families. And over time they've kind of, subdivided that land, but it wasn't necessarily done in like the most planned process.
Hmm.
So from a walkability factor, where we currently live, yes, we can actually walk to a big supermarket. We can actually walk to the cafes. Chajubamba is not that big, so I don't want to focus too much on Chajubamba, and I generally recommend this suburb for families that are looking at having a car as well, because that does make life a lot easier. We're
Sure.
actually very shortly going to be moving back into Cuenca proper,
Okay.
around the Primero de Mayo area, which is along the Yunnan the river. And so for me, that's probably our favorite part of town because it has the walkability factor that you're talking about. We can go for morning walks along the river for as long as we choose to. And it just has a really nice energy to it. I know
Yeah.
that might sound a little bit wishy-washy, but the
No.
feeling that I get and our family gets by living in that area, that actually matters a lot to us.
Yeah. So do you rent or did you purchase a property?
We rent at the moment. I'm trying
Okay.
to sell a property. I do have an apartment in Australia, and I've been trying to sell that, but I stopped that because the Australian dollar, like the Canadian dollar, basically took a bit of a nosedive
Yeah.
recently.
Yeah.
And so I'm holding off until the Australian dollar gets a little bit better, and then I will sell that property and I will buy something here. I'll probably
Okay.
look at something with a little bit of land. Basically, around a 15-minute drive from Cuenca is my sweet spot, and so that's generally what we'll be looking at personally.
Yeah.
But until then, we're going to be renting a large four-bedroom house near the Primero de Mayo area, and that's going to cost us around $900 a month. This for me, this is a really good value because it's massive, and it has a really big garden and all the bells and whistles.
Yeah. Are you living in a house? Do you rent a house now or an apartment?
We rent I'd call it a townhouse in Australia.
Okay.
So it's a house, but it's like a series. There's actually nine different houses in our little urbanization, but they're
Mm.
all kind of stacked next to each other.
Okay, great. Well, the last thing I have, Jason, everybody wants to know about the healthcare in Ecuador.
Yeah.
What's your take on it? Is it a quality healthcare? I hear it's quite good. And then how does an expat or retiree that's living there access it, and what do they have to pay per month?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's obviously something that we get asked a lot as well. And there are effectively, well, there's three systems here. You've got the free, but that's really basic. So for really small things, the Centro de Salud, they're called. Most expats wouldn't really go to them. That's, for example, the vaccinations for our baby. That's where we will go for that. But
Okay.
that's generally the only time I've had a lot of interaction with that. Then the next level up, you do have they call it the IESS system,
Yep.
and that's the form of it's a bunch of things, but it's also the Social Security network in Ecuador. And so they do have a hospital system attached to that. And that's if you have a job, for example, here, then part of your salary will go into the ESS system. One, to pay for your healthcare, two, to pay for your pension when you retire. Expats can buy into that system, and that's around $70 or $80 a month for that. The some of the shortfalls of that because it's publicly funded. Ecuador doesn't necessarily have the strongest government in the world, and when it comes to financing and financial management, it can be hit and miss. So if you're relying on certain medications, yeah, absolutely, you can get them super cheap, if not free through that system. but there might be a shortage at one point for whatever reason, and then the access to those particular medications might actually dry up.
Hmm.
But that system is generally the one that I would recommend if you have a lot of pre-existing conditions.
Hmm.
Why? Because the private insurance system generally doesn't cover those that well.
Sure.
That's the reality. So that's the third system that we talk about, and that's the one that most expats do use, in my experience, at least to some degree. Us, for example, I do have a health insurance policy. We call it more the emergency policy, so to speak. So it's got a very, very high deductible, and I'd only use that if something sort of catastrophic happened,
Okay.
and that would kick in. So something that I'm not, it's not going to, I'm not going to charge, I'm not going to lose like $20,000 or $30,000 if something really, really, really bad does happen. That's when that policy protects. So we self-insure for the smaller stuff.
Okay.
Doctor visits, for example, they range between $30 and $50 generally to
Okay.
see a doctor, and the availability is great. You can generally, message the doctor and go and see him that day or the next day,
Oh, wow.
which is kind of unheard of
Yeah,
for
that
a lot
is.
of people, including even where I'm from. Dentist appointments for a cleaning, that's probably going to cost you about the same, around $40 for a cleaning.
Hmm.
There is, well, I do know quite a few people that, that they might buy a property with us or whatever, but maybe their first interaction in Cuenca was to come here for, let's say, dental tourism, or for actual the health side of things. You do have to take, you do have to be a little bit more proactive
Hmm.
in the health system here. So, like choosing your doctor, and probably one of the biggest differences, there's no real GPs. There is one really good expat GP that pretty much a lot of the expats will use because she offers
Hmm.
that service. But your records, they do operate in silos, so you have to know, like, okay, what was my family history? What did I have? What was all this? And you have to take that to the doctor, and then they're going to help you out. So yeah, you do have to be a little bit more proactive in that side of things. But the insurance cost for the private side of things, my private my catastrophic policy, that costs around $35 a month.
Yeah.
But for a general policy, you're generally looking at around the $90 to $100 a month mark. That's something that you're actually going to use on a regular basis. The the tough part can be the claims process. So they're very strict in the timelines,
Yeah.
and so it can trick expats up, especially when they're new making their first claim. And so I only suggest having a really good talk with whatever insurance broker that you end up using
Hmm.
around the claims process and what is in network, what is out network, because it can be confusing. And if you miss those dates, then they're pretty much going to say, sorry, we're not going to reimburse you for whatever.
Sure. And I'm guessing that because it's so cheap, when especially for people coming from the United States, that even the IESS system, if it's $80 a month, and then you buy a private insurance for $100 a month, you're in at 180 per month, which is dirt cheap compared to what people pay here.
People definitely do that. So
Yeah.
they'll use, for example, the private insurance, what we're talking about before with the pre-existing, they generally have very low limits over the life of that illness or that condition. So that can be as low as, like $3,000, $5,000. And so if this is something that is bothering you and you're going to have issues, you're going to hit that cap. And then the insurance company is going to say, I'm not going to cover that anymore. And
Mhm.
so that's when expats will generally go, okay, for this particular thing, I do need to look into the ESS system.
Mhm.
And so they would potentially have the double insurance for that reason. And that does make sense.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, Jason, we've covered everything. Is there anything else you can think of that we didn't discuss that could be of value to the viewers that are watching, thinking about moving or retiring to Cuenca?
I'd say something that always comes up. I mean, it's not just Ecuador or Cuenca related, but something that can be really, really hard. Well, actually, this is Ecuador related. Is trust. So knowing which service that we have very strong defamation laws in Ecuador, and a lot of that time that means that you'll only hear the good side of the story, and so people aren't going to be willing to publicly not criticize or even add some sort of constructive feedback to, let's say, a service provider that they think hasn't necessarily done the best job because they're scared that they're actually going to get sued from this
Okay.
service provider. So for that reason, it can actually be really hard as a new expat coming into town to know who to trust.
I see.
So I would just say be careful sometimes of the recommendations you may see on public groups like Facebook and whatnot, because you're only ever going to hear half the story.
Yeah. Well, how many years have you been down there now?
I've been here for 7, in Cuenca for 6.
Yeah, so I mean, you're the ideal resource for people to connect with when they need to find other resources because you
I
know
mean,
who
we
to.
do help out a lot of people.
Yeah.
We
Oh,
do play that connector type role, but completely transparent. Sometimes it's really hard for us.
yeah.
We do business with a lot of companies here, and sometimes I'm even surprised at some of the things that people will do. So it's even a tough one for me to give a strong recommendation for certain services. I generally do provide recommendations, but I'll provide a caveat if I need to.
Yeah. All right. Well, Jason Scott, thank you so much for sharing all of this information about this beautiful city you live in, Cuenca, Ecuador. I really appreciate it.
No problem at all, Ray. Thanks for having me, and I hope to see you down here sooner than later.
All right, man. You have a great rest of the day, and I'll talk to you soon.
Good, buddy.